Book 8, The Last Day, Chapter 5, The 34th Day of Planting, A Very Long Day, Part 12 of 12. Pedo, Shem finally whispered from his prone position on the ground next to his wife. It was well after midnight, but no one was sleeping in the Shin, Brighter, or Zenas camps. Lek was sitting next to his father's head as Shem held his wife's cold hand. He was the only one who heard the word, so Lek motioned for his uncle to come over. Boskos kept a comforting hand on his father's shoulder. Pedo left Lilla to be soothed by their daughters. "I'm right here, Shem," he said, sitting down on the ground next to him. "What can I get you?" "It's about Mari," Shem whispered. "I couldn't help but notice she wasn't with you," Pedo said in a shaky voice. There was still a vigil over the ridge, hundreds of people waiting with torches, staring into the dark, hoping. More than once Henri had started down the trail, returning a short time later, shaking and frustrated, mumbling about how Perrin didn't want him to risk it. But no one even considered asking Shem what happened. They just sat in dread and waited for hours. Shem closed his eyes. "Just listen. I won't be able to say it twice. We went to the temple. I left her there. I hid in the trees like a coward. Thorn came. His guide was Leonard Croup. Leonard walked up to the temple. Mari confronted him. Scared Leonard to death, literally. He backed up off the portico, fell, broke his neck, I think, on the sharp stones below. Soldiers panicked. The prophecy, Pedo. She did it. She told everyone who she was. 1/3 ran in terror of her. Fantastic. Until..." Shem began to tremble, despite Boskos holding him. "Until Lemuel got to her. He drew his sword." Pedo was already quivering, huge tears sliding down his cheeks. Shem finally whispered the last words. "Lemuel killed Mari." Mari appeared at the ransacked temple in the middle of the night. She saw Perrin sitting on the sofa, set up properly in the slushy snow. Now he appeared to be in his 40s, the handsome colonel in white. "This remind you of anything?" he asked with a wink. He put his leg easily up on the arm of the sofa. She smiled at the memory of his moving her beloved sofa and edge out to the back garden after that first major land tremor so they'd have a safe place to sleep that night. But her thoughts quickly traveled back to more recent matters. She sat down next to him and sighed. Perrin put his arm around her. "Not going well at the ancient site, is it?" Mari rested her head against him. "No, it's terrible, just terrible." "I can feel them. Could you reach anyone?" "I finally got to Jatesy and some of the younger ones. I think Pedo felt me, but he was so involved with calming Lilla. Oh, Perrin, poor Lilla. She was hoarse with sobbing. I've never known her to get worked up to silence before. First Calla, then me?" She shook her head sadly. "Everyone has finally fallen asleep out of exhaustion. I held Brighter for half an hour until he fell asleep. I think he realized it was me. The poor boy kept whispering, 'I'm next, Mugga. I know I'm next.' Dawn will be coming too early for them." "I had to send Henri back a few times," Perrin told her. "He kept trying to go down to find you. We're close enough now that I could just shout and he heard me." "Oh, poor Henri," Mari sighed, then glanced at her husband, who was smirking slightly. "Nothing ever happened between us." "It's all right," he assured her. "And really, I wouldn't have minded. Well, I may have been a little jealous that he was with you and I wasn't. But had you two married, I would have been fine with you two making each other happy until the end. So would have Nan." "She told me that," Mari admitted, "up at the site. She was rather sad that we never got together. Even she thought we would have been a cute couple. Her words, not mine." Perrin chuckled and pulled her closer. He was much more sober when he asked, "And how's Shem?" "Is there any term stronger than devastated?" she whispered. "Never have I seen a man so thoroughly distraught. I don't think even you could reach him now. Calla and I were on either side of him for quite a while, doing all we could to get him to feel comfort. At one point he felt Calla, but he was so consumed with guilt that he pushed her away, afraid to feel her. Delivering me to Thorn was one thing, but now he feels he abandoned his wife." She turned to look at him. "Perrin," she hesitated to tell him the news Calla had given her, but she felt obligated. "He had feelings for me when we were in Edge." Perrin simply smiled at her shocking revelation. Mari's eyes widened. "So you knew it too?" I could see it in his eyes. Remember, I became very skilled at reading his expressions. It was off and on again for him. He could go for seasons without feeling anything, then suddenly be struck again with a desire for you. Why do you think I made it a point of kissing you in front of him so often? I wasn't just showing him the benefits of marriage. I was reminding him who you truly loved." She wilted against him. "I missed a lot of things, didn't I?" Perrin chuckled softly and kissed her head. "But never the important things, my darling wife. That's why I wrote the letter, the one I left in my desk in Edge that I fully expected him to find if I died. In it, I told Shem that I knew he admired you from afar for all these years, and now that I was dead, I wanted him to act on his desires, marry you, and take care of you and my children as if they were his. I told him I was sure you two would be very happy together." Mari blinked at him. "You put it that bluntly?" Perrin nodded sadly. "Shem would have needed to have it put to him bluntly, or he wouldn't have dared do it. But I never once thought that letter would end up in Lemuel's hands, or Genev's. I planned to burn it the day I retired from the army, and the danger of my dying on duty had passed, or Shem finally married. But I never went back to my office after I resigned, if you remember. But in a way," he continued thoughtfully, "I realize now just how important that letter was to everything else that followed. It must have led them to create that story about you and Shem, and kept your traitorous behavior in the minds of those of the army for all those years. Every soldier out there knows the history of what you supposedly did to me, and that Lemuel had you filled with arrows for it. If they hadn't, your name would have been forgotten. Then hearing you shouted a few hours ago would not have had any effect on them. Instead, it terrified them to know you were still alive." Mari shook her head in amazement. "I'm just beginning to realize how our actions in the past affect the future. I can only imagine what horrible moments from school poor Leonard was reliving when he saw me coming for him." "And Shem!" she exclaimed. "Oh, I never knew. But Calla knew. She said that Shem explained his feelings for me before he even asked her to marry him. But he never thought of me again, or any other woman besides his wife. But now he feels like he was unfaithful to her at the end. While she was laying for hours in the brush, he was with me. During his wife's last moments, he wasn't there for her. I don't know if he'll ever get over that," she whispered. Perrin sighed. "Oh, we knew Shem would be tried severely before the end. This is it." "Well, forgive me, but I don't understand it," Mari exclaimed, nearly angry for what was happening to him. "Shem's trial is to lose those closest to him right when he needs all of us the most?" Perrin looked at her patiently. "Oh," she said slowly, as the Creator gently dropped another lump of understanding into her mind, along with a sense of forgiveness for her lack of understanding. She had asked for it, after all. "I see it now. His trial is to see if he will take comfort. He's always giving it and always telling others to receive it, but will he receive it himself? Perrin nodded. Not only comfort, but forgiveness. Shem's never done anything truly terrible in his life, unlike some of us. He nodded to young Per over in the trees. Mari leaned forward. Exactly what is he doing? I noticed him when I arrived. He's doing some thinking. On his knees? Best way, isn't it? Mari started to smile. Oh, Perrin! Give him some time. He has a lot to discuss with the Creator tonight. You might be there until morning. Mari leaned back into his arms. Oh, thank goodness. So what finally got him there? Perrin hesitated. Well, we had a lot to discuss ourselves. By his demeanor, she knew what their discussion had been. Good. I'm glad you did. Mari patted his arm reassuringly. So, did you tell him everything? Everything, he said. Even about Lemuel? Yes. She felt all his heaviness in that small word. Taking his face in her hands, she said firmly, He's not, Perrin. I've told you this before. Reluctantly, he lifted his gaze to meet her eyes, and she was surprised that after all these years, and even in paradise, he still dragged that around, as if his soul was hunchbacked. Not even the jagged scar on his back was there anymore, but this one was, twisting him at odd angles. He's not yours, Mari insisted. Perrin, your son did not murder me tonight. He didn't try to apprehend us for trial, nor did he try to frame me as a traitor all those years ago. But the old scar itched at him again, and he started to turn away until Mari jerked him back. It doesn't matter whose blood flows in his veins. He is Cain's son, raised and trained and manipulated by Cain, not you. You couldn't have changed all of that in the few moons you had him in Edge. None of that matters. How can you be so sure, he whispered, that who I was, who I was then, didn't create him, and then all of this horror now? Because blood doesn't matter, decisions do, she insisted, and saw that he didn't know how to believe her. It was time to do what she did best. Fine, we're doing this right now, and don't start to say there's no time to debate because we just left time. This is important, Perrin Shin. More important at this moment than anything else going on in the world, because you can't complete your duty to the world until you get this right in your head. She knew the words weren't hers, but the Creator's, and only Mari could deliver them. Perrin appeared to her now merely a teenage boy, as one of her many students back in Edge, meekly ready to receive her chastising, but wishing for something better. The agony mixed with hope in his eyes nearly melted her. Only nearly. Professor Shin never let her students get to her when she was in her element. Let's take the stance that Lemuel Thorne is indeed your son. No, no, no. Don't turn away from me, Perrin. Look me in the eyes. That's better. Now, would you agree that for your first 20 years or so, you were exactly like Lemuel? His chin trembled as he nodded. Knowing that was inadequate, he said feebly, Yes, ma'am. And I agree too, Mari said sternly. His vain ambition, his lack of concern for anything else but his own status, yes, that was you. But for more than 50 years after that, you were much more like your son Peido Shin. Do you agree? Perrin began to bob his head noncommittally, but then nodded once. Again he said, even quieter, Yes, ma'am, I tried. Mari's expression softened. Oh, yes, you tried. And you succeeded, Perrin Shin. Oh, how you succeeded. Now, what was the difference between young Perrin and older Perrin? Well, there was Hogel, he began almost timidly. Mari cut him off with, "No, he assisted, but something else made that dramatic change in you. What was it?" He looked up, his eyes slightly brighter. "The Creator." Mari beamed at him as if he'd just completed a difficult math problem. "Yes, the Creator. You let him into your soul, and then after that whole mess with Ursula, you let him change you for good. There was nothing you could have done to fix any of that. You had to turn it all over to the Creator. But that's not everything," she told him, and his large dark eyes stared at her with hope on the very edge of acceptance. "You chose to let him in. You wanted to be a different man. You asked the Creator to forgive you, to change you, to make you into an excellent patriarch who loved his family and his community and wanted nothing more than to serve them. You," she jabbed him in the chest, "chose this life. Do you agree with that?" Something in his countenance shifted, and he appeared to her to be the 28-year-old captain she debated in Edge and also fell in love with. "Yes, I agree with that," he said with a cautious smile. "As do I," she said, trying to keep her teacher tone, but looking so deeply into his eyes was getting to her. "Perrin, I noticed that even when we were courting, well, it wasn't really courting, whatever we were doing before we were married, let's put it that way." Oh, he looked exactly as he did then, and she had to break away from his gaze in order to concentrate. "Perrin, for years I felt like you were two men shoved into one body. There was the officer side of you, then the husband and father side. Frequently they were in conflict. Do you remember?" His countenance shifted to something more brooding. "Oh yes, I remember." "I now understand why," she said, lifting his chin. "Perrin, right now there are two very influential men in Salem. One has been securing it for the past 25 years and has been up since well before dawn today, trying to get the last of the Salemites to leave. The other man has been here for a much shorter time, but is trying to destroy all that the first man loves. It's the rector of Salem against the general of the world, if you will. And Perrin," she placed a hand on his chest, "both of those men come from right here. What makes the difference between your two sons is the choices they make. Look at the man you chose to nurture, who you became, what your son Pedo became. It is all a choice. And whatever Lemuel decides reflects only Lemuel, not you. Will you accept that?" He was trembling so violently that she knew his answer already, but he needed to say it. He needed to hear himself say it. "Yes," he managed. "Yes, I will accept that. But Mari, I failed with Lemuel. I failed to raise him. Did I abandon my own son? To be raised by Cain of all people? And then I had another chance when Lemuel came to the fort as my captain. But I couldn't. Oh, I just couldn't. I hated everything about him because I was afraid of him. Mari, I might have been able to help him then, but I couldn't get past myself. I messed it up. I can't go back and fix any of that. The state of the world right now may very well be my fault. I can't fix that." "No, you can't," she said simply. "Only the Creator can. Lemuel is the Creator's son too, and I have no doubt that the Creator can heal all the wounds you've inflicted on each other over the years. In fact, the entire world can be healed. And you're right, sometimes we make such big mistakes we can't fix them. That's why the Creator sent His Son, why we have a Savior, and why you have to turn all of this over to them. When the time is right, they will let you assist in helping Lemuel, I have no doubt. Now, General of Salem, surrender." Surrender your pride, your fear, your doubt, everything that traps you, and give it all to them. Let them heal and strengthen you so you can finish what you were sent to do. You can't save yourself or Lemuel. Only the Savior can save. She gripped his face again and kissed him, and he could barely kiss her back. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you." And he collapsed in her arms. Mari held him tightly as he melted into her, and she had the impression that he was having another conversation, which she wasn't privy to. But that was all right. The Creator was done using her, and was now pouring understanding and strength directly into Perrin. There was something more he had to accomplish, but first he had to release this one last enormous regret. "You fear that you caused all of this by fathering Lemuel, then abandoning him to Cain," Mari whispered as she stroked his hair, his head against her chest. "But consider this. Even if you had raised him, even if we had influenced him, he might have made the same decisions. Just look at young Per and how easily he rejected all we gave him. We still may be in the same position because of who Lemuel wanted to be. All of your worry, all of your regret, led to another fear," she continued, insight filling her mind. "What your duty is at the last day. But you couldn't deal with that until you came to some acceptance about Lemuel, right?" He nodded into her shoulder. "You have a part to play, don't you?" she guessed. Then she knew, because the Creator set into her mind her duty as well. We all have a part. Something changed in Perrin, and suddenly he became steadier, stronger within her embrace. "And now I see it all," he said, his voice determined and powerful. He sat up out of her hug, and Mari was taken aback to see him now, fierce and strong, as he appeared in his 40s during the Moreland offensive, yet also so full of sympathy and even love. He pulled her into his arms again, not the penitent, regretful teenage boy anymore, but the protective, commanding husband and officer. It was Mari's turn to melt into him as he remained silent, and she knew he was thinking, preparing, and plotting. He held her tightly, letting their strength mingle together. Eventually he said, "I've got it all now. I've got the plan. I do get to help save. We all do." Mari knew he wasn't murmuring to her, but to the entire cosmos. His grip on her finally loosened, and he kissed her tenderly. "Are you all right again?" she asked as he pulled away. Much had shifted and rearranged in him, and now he appeared so young and innocent, yet also so old, like an ancient general born today. He nodded soberly. "You're right. I couldn't see it all before because I had to get past Lemuel. I had to release him to those who can actually fix all my mistakes. And now?" He surprised her by smiling. "I needed you here to get me through one more worry. Only you could do that for me, here in paradise. I'm so glad Lemuel killed you." She couldn't help but snicker at that, but only briefly, because she could feel the burden that had fallen upon him. It was enormous, but he hefted it easily, confidently. He was capable of anything. "By the way," he added, that familiar twinkle in his eye, "that wasn't so much a debate as it was a lecture." She batted her eyelashes at him. "Well, of course, because you had absolutely no position for a proper debate. Any flimsy argument you could have presented would have had no chance against my superior intellect and logic." She sniffed haughtily. He burst into a grin. "Have I told you today how much I love you?" She opened her mouth to answer, then tilted her head. "Actually, you have not. Not once since I came to paradise." "Well then," he leaned in closely, I love you." Her forehead met his. "And I love you too." "Of course you do." He sat up and sniffed haughtily himself, and she giggled. His countenance was brighter than she'd ever seen, and was much lighter, as if a burden had finally been set aside to make room for a new duty. What that was, he wasn't about to share it with her yet, because she needed to remain focused on their grandson and on Shem, she reminded both of them. "We were talking about Shem, if he will accept forgiveness." "Oh, yes," Perrin said, and sighed. "He's so unlike me. Yet he's carrying a burden even heavier than mine. A burden he didn't even have to pick up and now refuses to put down." Mari felt the shift as he did, the move back into regular time. Young Per had been frozen in the distance, but now he appeared to be breathing again, his lips silently moving. Had she been in her body, Mari would have felt the shift jarring, but moving in and out of time was no problem for her spirit. "Shem never made any grave mistakes to plead forgiveness for," Perrin said, picking up where they had left off. "Not even his temptations about you, really. He beat them down every time they tormented him, and never did anything to encourage them. In many ways, he's the complete opposite of me when I was younger," he added contritely. "His knowledge of right and wrong, his sense of duty, and most of all, his devotion to me were all stronger than his attraction to you. He never acted on those temptations, even though he had plenty of opportunities." Mari scrunched her face. "He did? Think about it. How often was I sedated, and he was in our house all night to lend assistance, should you need it?" Mari cringed. "Dozens." Remarkable man, isn't he? He had the opportunities right before him to act on his feelings, knowing I was completely incapacitated. And never once did he attempt anything, did he? "Never," Mari remembered, then bit her lip. Perrin tipped his head. "Mari, for once I'm having a hard time reading you. What is it?" "I'm realizing now," she began slowly, "how difficult I made things for him. I frequently hugged him, especially on your worst nights. I begged him to stay nearly every night. I was feeling lonely," she confessed, "and also very, very vulnerable. Not only were you not in a position to protect us, but we needed protection from you. Shem was the only capable man who came to our rescue, besides Rector Young," she added with a sad chuckle, remembering their old, tiny rector. Here in Paradise, Young was much younger, larger, and stronger. "Had Shem at any point pressed his advantage?" She looked up at her husband. "Considering my fragile and vulnerable state, my need to feel close to a strong man, I have to confess that had he tried, he may have succeeded." She grimaced in apology. But Perrin only smiled sadly. "Everyone thinks that's what happened anyway. No one realizes just how strong each of you had to be, by yourselves, to do the right thing. I'm sorry, Mari, that I left you so vulnerable, that both of you were put into such a difficult circumstance. But I also think we came out of it far stronger and abler than before, and with nothing to regret," he added significantly. But one last thing worried Mari. "I kissed him goodbye yesterday, on the lips." "I know," Perrin said steadily. "I was watching." "But I didn't mean anything by it," she exclaimed. "He's my brother. That's the only way I've seen him for decades. Then she saw the twinkle in Perrin's eye, and she put her hands on her hips. "Is teasing allowed in Paradise?" "Only briefly," he chuckled. "And don't worry, it didn't mean to Shem what it would have meant decades ago. Back in Edge, that brief kiss would have been exquisite torture. But last night he was merely saying goodbye to another sister." Mari sank into Perrin's arms in relief. His heart is solely callous, Perrin assured her. And that's what's going to cause him the greatest turmoil now. First, he was blaming himself for your death, and now he's blaming himself for Calla's. Mari sighed. Oh, we both felt him. He was thinking that if he only had stopped and looked around before he left, he would have noticed her. He's thinking he missed a prompting somewhere because he was so thrilled by his success. He fears his pride got in the way of his duty. Right now, Perrin said bleakly, he thinks he killed the 2 women who meant the most to him. But he didn't! Others killed us! Oh, it's so illogical! Grief isn't logical, Mari, he reminded her. I remember a certain woman telling her best friend on the way to burying her husband that there was no purpose for her to keep living. I couldn't think of any then, she admitted. Not that day. I was so sure you were going to come get me. And I fully intended to, Perrin said. All of our parents greeted me when I arrived here just as they greeted you. The very first thing I said was, wait while I go get Mari. Really? You were coming to get me? He smiled. It's not really paradise without you, you know. But they said no. I was ready to get angry, right then and there in paradise, if you can believe it. But suddenly Pax's vision unveiled in my mind, and what happened earlier this evening was precisely what I saw then. I realized you had to stay. Who was I to insist my wife be with me when she still had a fantastic prophecy to fulfill? I tried so hard to reach you that night, he continued, pulling her even closer. But it was impossible. You were so closed off. I asked Tabit Densel to try, but only Calla was hearing her. You finally felt me in the morning when you kissed that cold body before they moved it. But there wasn't any way I could explain to you you couldn't come with me then because of what you had to do today. Mari scoffed lightly. Ugh, it's probably for the best we don't know the end from the beginning. From over here, everything is so clear. And Shem can't see anything clearly, said Perrin. He's feeling a depth of grief that won't allow him to accept any other explanations besides the ones he's chosen. He caused 2 women's deaths. He's going to have to forgive himself then, isn't he? Mari said. Even though he didn't do anything wrong. He was actually fulfilling prophecies, but each fulfillment cost a life close to him. Now he has to learn to accept the healing power of the Creator. It's the last lesson he has to learn. He's led so many people to that power, but never had to pull so deeply from it himself. You can help him do that too, she encouraged. You know more about that than almost anyone. Look how much progress you've made with young Per, and look how much you've learned just tonight. But Perrin shrugged sadly. Shem's not listening to me. He also never knew about my connection to Lemuel. He never knew to what depths I fell. But he will listen to his big brother when the time is right. I know it, Mari insisted. I know it too, he said, squeezing her. Until then? Calla won't leave him, Mari said. Lek and Hulda have felt her presence, and I think they've even heard her. Before I left, they were telling Shem that she was there and that she doesn't hold him responsible. It's ironic, Perrin mused. For all the years Shem and I spent in the army, it's our wives who die glorious deaths in battle. Calla by arrows and you by the sword. The world really has become twisted. Mari snorted softly. Someday Shem will see how romantic it all was. Oh, Perrin, if only he could see what we see. If he could just understand, he wouldn't be so consumed with grief and guilt. How do we reach him? That's the mortal trial, my darling wife, Perrin said. To keep breathing and crawling in the dark when we can't see what's ahead of us. He has to choose to feel comfort. He has to call for the Creator to help him. He has to surrender like I'm learning how to. And since he can be as stubborn as I am sometimes, this may take some time." "Time we don't have any more," Mari pointed out. She glanced over at young Per. "Speaking of time, do you think he'll make it?" He shrugged. "It's up to him how quickly he progresses. There's time, but just barely enough. But Mari, he's already asked that we go with him in the morning. He's heading for the ancient site, and he wants us to help him face his parents." "Yes!" she cried out, then slapped her hand over her mouth. "Did he hear me?" Perrin chuckled. "Only if you want him to hear you." She watched her grandson praying, but he didn't move from his position. "Of all of our family, he's the one in the best position right now," Perrin told her. "Mari, go back up to the temple site for the night and see if anyone else can be reached. Young Per and I will be fine here until dawn. He's finally going home." And that is the end of part 12 of 12, ending chapter 5, the 34th day of planting. A very long day, I warned you. It was a long day. Thank you.